Hi everybody, it's really great to be here. I lived in Pittsburgh for 14 years and still come back frequently and just consider it my hometown. But I did grow up outside of Baltimore, which makes the Blair Witch Project one of the reasons it became such a powerful and favorite horror movie of mine. But first, I'm a sociologist, an author. I wrote a book, Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, and it was all about how and why we like to do scary things. So, why we would intentionally, purposefully go and do things that in real life we would want to avoid at all costs, why we would dedicate time and resources. So I went to Japan and South America, across the US and Canada, doing a lot of different kinds of scary things, from thrill rides and amusement parks, to paranormal investigations, of course, lots of haunted houses, looking at movies, looking at just all the different ways that we choose to be afraid, and then researching why we do it, what we get out of it. And there's a lot to gain. I'm not going to get as much into the science behind how it changes the way we feel and the way we think, and how it can contribute to building resilience and confidence and all of that. Instead, I want to focus on the content that we choose to engage with, and why we like the kinds of stories and the kinds of images and the narratives. Why do they resonate? And that is what I want to focus on tonight, and I'm so excited to talk about that in the context of the Blair Witch Project and celebrate its 20th anniversary, which I also cannot believe that it has been 20 years. One of the things that I quickly realized, and you probably all know as well, is that people are always going to be writing about different kinds of content. Right now, there's somebody writing an amazing story about aliens or clowns or zombies, ghosts. All of that is always going to be kind of in the cultural background. But when a story surpasses expectations, when it manages to just hit it big at the box office, when it results in my mom calling me in a panic, asking me if I know these people, Josh, Mike, and Heather, and if I had any idea where they might be in Burkittsville, and I'm like, what is happening? What is it that makes something go from just kind of in the background to a mainstream kind of cross-cultural phenomena? And it's when the content, the experience, the whole kind of thing of it is resonating with something that's happening. It's reflecting, it's tapping into an anxiety, a tension, a sentiment that is there just below the surface in all of our lives. And that was the Blair Witch Project. So I want to go back to the 90s. The 90s were an amazing time. I was born in 1980, so that was my teenage years, my adolescence, and into young adulthood. And so I have very vivid memories of it. And as I was kind of preparing this talk and going through all of my old CD collections and photos, I was just amazed to think about how much our world has changed and what it did feel like during that time period. So let's get into a time machine and look at the 90s. First, it was massive digital expansion. So houses were going from having 5 to 10 channels to 20 channels, 30, 40, 50, 60, and I don't even know how many cable channels there are today, but the cable box was replacing the antenna, and we were exposed to just amazing amount of content that was completely unknown to previous generations. But with the expansion, there was also a tremendous amount of consolidation. So you had Clear Channel, or iHeartRadio, systematically going from market to market and buying out the radio groups, and all of a sudden you had what was a really rich regional diversity within each genre, kind of being diluted to the most mainstream kind of what's going to make everybody happy. So in the early 90s, you had you had West Coast grunge kind of making it big, which was something to be really proud of, like something that was just an independent phenomena, took off in a big way. to 1999, where we have Smash Mouth and Sugar Ray and Lit begging us not to steal their sunshine, and so it was just kind of a little bit less edgy, and everybody was listening to the same thing. We had, you know, the gritty, very kind of hardcore rap. By 1999, we had a post Biggie Smalls, Puff Daddy, and Will Smith getting jiggy with it, and everything was, you know, on the surface kind of really light and poppy and just bright. And it you know, felt like it was on the surface a pretty good time. We look at how we were communicating. So in the 90s, I don't think I got my first cell phone until I was maybe 18. Prior to that, you were lucky if you had the second generation Zach Morris phone, no digital display, not even the flip phone, no texting, only plugged in when you were going to use it, only turned on when you were going to use it. And honestly, I didn't want it. It felt like a burden. You couldn't say anymore, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have access to a phone. You know, I meant to call you, but just couldn't do it. But then all of a sudden, you know, we have smartphones. But at that time, you could disconnect pretty easily, but by 1999, you know, more people, a lot of people had cell phones or at least car phones and were able to communicate. You look at what was on TV, and we had the introduction of reality TV in 1992, and it was a time where you actually believed that what you were seeing was real, that you would connect with these people that weren't characters, that, you know, you loved them or you loathed them, but you felt like it was a genuine, raw, unfiltered experience that you got to witness. You know, by 2000, that was largely gone, and gone were the days where you felt like, you know, you hated someone because that was your reaction. Now it's a knowledge of, okay, the producers wanted to make this person the evil witch, and you know there's this editing and curation that's behind it. But at the time, it felt true, it felt genuine. A lot of that changed because of the Blair Witch. And so that was the world that we were in, and we get to January 1999, and Britney Spears releases Hit Me Baby One More Time. And by the summer, we have Christina Aguilera. She's everybody's most favorite genie in a bottle, or most loathed genie in a bottle. Jennifer Lopez, Destiny's Child, all of these people who we know so much more about today were just making it into the scene as pop icons. And it, you know, we just kind of consumed it without thinking too much about it, and that was our world. When we look at what was happening with the internet, that's where we start to see just how quickly our world was changing. So 1995, less than 10% of the US was online. By 1999, it was about 36%. An exponential growth, but still not the majority. And people use the internet in a very different way. People would check their email maybe every other day. It was not a place that you went to buy something quickly or to find answers quickly. My senior year of high school, I really wanted to find this childhood book I loved. I went to the library sent me to a local bookstore. The bookstore took down my information, said, I'll contact you whenever I find a copy. A couple weeks later, you know, I got a call on the landline, and he said, I found a copy, it's $56. And I was like, well, I can't afford that. I bought the book about 7 years ago on Amazon for $12. So it was a very different world. Even, you know, getting all of the data for this talk, I was able to just quickly kind of do a Google search. And back then, though, it was not that access to information in such a quick and available way. And back then, you know, well, it was 28K dial-up, so it was forever, so you couldn't really do things very quickly either. But most people were staying within the confines of America Online. You know, AOL, they would send the CDs so frequently. I mean, my aunt, she used them to ward off birds from her garden. She would tie them to these sticks, and you had all these CD-ROMs just flying around. And they worked really well, but it was relentless. They wanted everybody online, and you know, it had a huge impact. But it wasn't until, you know, the 2000s that people started branching out beyond AOL. For those of us who were kind of going beyond the AOL boundaries, it was a whole new world. You know, it was a very, honestly, kind of a scary world. And it was not a world where you could just go on Google and find a group that you were interested in. You had to work at it. You had to find somebody in a chat group who said, oh, check out this web page. And the web page would be, a static page, but then maybe have a link to a social forum. And it was, for a lot of people, a really great experience, an opportunity to find people, like you, that you maybe didn't feel you could find in your real life, and to connect and to share stories, to, make your own personal web blogs. If anybody remembers Diaryland, that was launched in 1999, precursor to LiveJournal, and, today I don't even know if there's a lot of that happening. It's happening on Facebook, Snapchat. But back then, you had to work a little harder to navigate this new internet. And for the most part, for young teens and young adults, it was positive. But then you found yourself all of a sudden in a space that is terrifying. I remember clicking on a link one time and just seeing all these images of like butchered animals, and just, I was like, where did I find myself? How did I get here? And how do I get out of here? So very quickly, especially for younger people, we were realizing there was this whole other world, outside of AOL, outside of Netscape, and that it was full of, some scary things. It was full of predators, of monsters. It was a place where, the Columbine shooters, Eric and Aaron, they were early adopters and very active on the internet back in 1999. And Columbine was April 20th, 1999, and that definitely had, that marked the beginning of a whole other tangent I won't go down. But online is a space that many people were finding each other, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and oftentimes very scary. So this was the world in which the Blair Witch Project was produced, and it was the world that embraced it, or at least engaged with it in a way that told us, okay, what is it here that is so captivating? What has it tapped into that is resonating so powerfully? And yes, we can talk about like how viral marketing, that was unknown of. Now, not viral marketing in general, that's been something that we can see throughout time, but the digital, the new version of this viral marketing, digital viral campaign, nobody knew what that was. And so when you started seeing flyers and even local news stations talking about missing teens, and you went to this web page that had all of the trappings of legitimacy, and that's what we see when we look back through time at hoaxes that have been really effective. It's because they're done in a way that we don't question. Our default is to believe that which is distributed in a way that we associate with truth. So we hear something from our local newscasters, and we're like, okay, that must be true. We see these very legit missing kid posters that have been posted around college campuses, must be true. Who would ever do something like that, if it wasn't true? It's so horrific to think about. And so we accepted it, and you go back through time and you can see lots of evidence of this. War of the Worlds broadcast, and yes, it was overdone how many people actually freaked out, but a good number of people did believe it. Benjamin Franklin actually was a notorious prankster, just spreading false information and doing these kinds of public hoaxes. But in an age where the internet was new and not a known kind of platform, a lot of people believed it, and it gained a ton of attention, a ton of attraction. People were going to the website, and that drove people then to the theaters. So that was a big part of why it was successful. It was successful because of this use of the handheld first-person perspective. It was the first time that an audience had been exposed in a theater to that kind of filmmaking, and it lends itself to the horror genre so well because of many reasons. But the first one is that, in any horror movie, the more that you can connect to a character, the more you're putting yourself in that character's shoes, the more terrifying it can feel. We've got this amazing ability to empathize, to imagine ourselves in someone else's body. And with first-person perspective, you are Heather, you are Josh, you are Mike, and you are experiencing what they're experiencing. You're seeing their facial expressions just right in your face. And we've evolved to pay attention to faces, and we understand each other by trying to figure out what someone else's thinking, and we do that by recreating it in ourselves. So we were there with them, but first-person perspective also is a sense of immersion, but without control. You know, they control where the camera's looking. In wide angle, you can choose to look over here at this tree or to look over there, but you are locked in their gaze. You're essentially trapped in their vision, and so it's a loss of control too, which is foundational to fear. So viral marketing, first-person perspective, those things definitely contributed to it becoming a box office success. But I really do believe that it was the content and the story and how it really resonated with what people were experiencing as we navigated this new world of technology. As we went into these spaces that were dark and twisting and unknown, and we empathized. We could empathize with what they were doing. You have three people who were motivated by curiosity, a sense of adventure, a sense of like, I can do this. They go out into the woods. All of a sudden, they're getting torn apart. They start questioning themselves. They start questioning their reality. They start questioning each other. There's this unknown threat that's lurking in the dark that they can't see, that they can't avoid, that they can't prepare for. And we all know in horror, as soon as you see the monster, it's not as scary. What we imagine in our mind is always more scary, but it's also that once we see it, we can then start planning like, okay, this monster's going to kill me. I have no hope. Done. There's a satisfaction and closure even when it's bad. But the unknown, the not knowing, is the anxiety, is the terror. That's where fear really lives. And the Blair Witch is all about the unknown and never being able to see, even in the end, which I get goosebumps when I think about the final scene. But here's a group, they don't trust each other. They don't trust themselves. They don't trust what they're seeing. There's an unknown threat. And that's how I felt in the 90s. Like, what is this world? Who can I trust? Who can I turn to? And then fundamentally learning that you're going to find yourself sometimes in the dark, alone, no one to trust, and nowhere to turn. And the draw to that, for a generation growing up, transitioning from analog to digital, it's so, I don't know if it can be recreated until we go to the next time that kind of transition happens. It was so much more than just sneaking into, say, like the adult section of the VHS of your local video store, where you're like, oh, I'm in here, nobody knows I'm in here. Doing that online was a whole different level. There was no parent there to pull you back. There was no supervision, and you did have this intense feeling of vulnerability. And I think that that's what the Blair Witch captured, is how do we navigate now in this world where the rules aren't written, there don't really seem to be any boundaries, and we don't know who to trust. We're 20 years in now, and we can look around and see how that's evolved into, the world we live in today with Facebook and social media and all of the politics around that. But I really do think that was fundamental to the success of the Blair Witch Project. And I don't think that if it were released today, it would have the same impact, because we are dealing with different tensions and different stresses. And so but we still see the power of horror movies to capture us in those moments. If you look at the success of Get Out, it's revealing, it's reflecting back, but also a production, emerging from the time and place in which we are living. And I love that about horror, and I love how these movies will act as a kind of time capsule to look back and see what we were afraid of and what it might be saying and why it's resonating with us. So that's what I see when I look back, as somebody who came to age during that time period. But you might take something totally different from the movie that's just as valid and that connects to something in a way that really resonates with you, and that's great, and that's what movies allow us to do, to each kind of see a reflection of ourselves and an opportunity to tackle our fears, but in the safety of a movie theater, or the safety of a dorm room, or your parents' basement with your friends. You've got that distance, just enough distance to kind of get close to the danger and then say, no, you know what, I'm good. Or to make it all the way through and say, okay, I did it. I feel a little bit more confident. I feel like maybe I can, wake up tomorrow morning and not be quite as scared. So I invite everybody tonight to really take themselves back in time, or imagine a time without technology, to just kind of feel that sense of uncertainty, of unknown, tap into things that make you feel vulnerable, because that's what it did for me and for my friends and for an entire generation. So I'm so excited to celebrate this. I think it'll be absolutely incredible to see it on this screen, which if you've never seen anything on the screen before, get ready, because it is an incredible experience. So here's to a great screening. And just a moment for a little bit of self-promotion. I am having another book that will be published in the spring on pain. So I'm a barrel full of fun, but looking at how and why we can engage with pain in ways that might be beneficial. So you can check that out, or buy my book at margeekerr.com. And let's have a great, scary, fun time. Thanks.